Okay, great. So thank you guys. Thank you for the kind introduction. So today the talk I'm going to give is one that's a bit different from some of the others that I give, and I'll focus not so much on the details of the technology itself and how to divide polynomials by other polynomials to make sure they equal the numbers you want at particular coordinates, but more on a different way of thinking about some of the overarching philosophy behind things like cryptography, things like programmable cryptography, and some of the things that we're doing in the blockchain space. Definitely not all of the things. Not the $3 million monkeys, not SBF, not Mt. Gox, sorry, but some of the things. So one of the reasons why I think it's important to think about this is that I think there's a lot of the fundamental kind of philosophical ideas that motivated early Bitcoin and that I think early Ethereum also ended up inheriting are ideas that at this point are 15 years old and that responded to 15-year-old problems, right? So who here remembers the words that were encoded in the Genesis block of Bitcoin? Right, January 3rd, 2009, Chancellor on brink of second bailout for banks, right? This is what Bitcoin is about. Bitcoin was, at the beginning, about responding to the 2007-2008 financial crisis, concerns about hyperinflation of the US dollar, concerns about commercial banks misbehaving, concerns about central banks misbehaving, and all of these issues. Now, fast forward to 15 years to 2023. In 2023, we have pandemics, we have wars, we have social media going crazy in all kinds of directions, we have hyper-accelerating AI that may or may not blow up the world in 10 to 20 years. So is anyone here willing to seriously tell me that all of these problems would be solved if we just were on a gold standard instead of using the US dollar? Okay, 0 hands raised. Perfect. So I think it's important to kind of really think about some of these background ideas and think about how they might be adapted to some of the challenges that the world is facing in the 2020s and probably for the rest of this century. So DIAC. Who here has seen the people on Twitter with the EAC tag in their username? Great. So you know what EAC is, fortunately. So this is a tweet from Beth Bezos, who is one of the high priests of EAC. Welcome to Twitter 2023. Basically, fighting for the accelerated advent of the techno-capital singularity. So EAC is a response to a bunch of things. I think the AI safety movement recently, anti-growth ideology is more generally, historically, right? The mentality that technology is bad and things would be better if we could just decide not to want stuff and be okay with living in cottages and huts like we theoretically used to. And it's just a general perception of stagnation and bureaucratic inefficiency. And the goal was to accelerate technology, empower humanity, and do all of these things quickly. So do I personally agree with EAC? I think I agree with some aspects of it, but I disagree with some aspects of it, right? So technology is super valuable and massively improves a lot of lives, and lots of people underappreciate this, right? And to me, this is like a super valuable and super important point, right? Unless humanity massively improves its technology, literally every single person on stage is going to die. Think about this. This is a statement that is literally true, right? Unless humanity massively improves its technology, pretty much everyone on stage is going to be dead within the next 100 years. Now, sorry, Mother Nature, but we, humanity, will not give you a free pass on killing you people just because you are Mother Nature. We stopped doing that when we started creating medicine. We stopped doing that once we started building cities. And we are going to cure aging, and we will stop you from killing any of us over the next few centuries. Now, this is the part of EX that I really appreciate, but the part that I am where I kind of depart from, the vision of people like Bev Jesus is that direction matters too. So this is a kind of internet meme description of what I mean here, right? So you can think about kind of the anti-technology view, which basically says that, there is something dark that is ahead of us. And one of the safe things that we can do is basically to, quote, take a step back and retreat to, something that is older and simpler and more sustainable in some way. Then you have the EAC view. The EAC view says that, well, no, the bright thing is not behind us. The bright thing is something that is ahead of us. And the thing that's behind us is actually a really scary bear that's going to go and eat people. So this is another way of thinking about this, right? Now, my view is a middle view, and the middle view is combines aspects of both, right? So the bright future exists, but also a very, very dark future exists. And at the same time, there also is actually a bear behind us. And so it's a challenging world, right? The only way is forward, but there is a good kind of forward and there is a bad kind of forward. And this is something that I think a lot of people are saying and that I think a lot of people really recognize, right? That unless we move forward, there is a huge amounts of suffering and problems and all kinds of issues in the world that are just going to continue, that are just not going to get resolved. But, there's also really bad stuff that is happening and that could happen. And there's some kind of distinction between these two different kinds of forward. Now, there's a lot of ways in which you could try to make this distinction. And this is one of the framings that I sometimes think about, right? And I think there are many different framings here that are valid, right? So one of them, for example, is also, is social technology going to accelerate fast enough to deal with some of the physical technology that we're creating? And a lot of people thinking about governance and public goods funding and these kinds of issues are going to think about that framing a lot. But the one that I'll focus on today is offense versus defense, right? Some technologies make it easier to attack. Other technologies make it easier to defend. Worlds where it's easier to defend are good and make good things possible. Worlds where it's easier to attack are bad and make bad things possible. This is the core frame. So this is Switzerland. Switzerland gets praised a lot on the internet, especially in crypto circles, right? There's a lot of people that you hear talking about, let's make blockchains be a digital Switzerland. I think that was a line that Tezos likes to use a lot back in 2016 to 18. It's a lot of people really, when you ask them, like, what is a country that they consider having like the perfect form of governance? Switzerland is definitely not for all people, but for many people, the one that they really cite as the best possible example that exists in reality, right? It's it respects freedom very well. It's very democratic in a very deep way. You have a lot of governance happening at the local cantonal level. It's the sort of country where no one knows who the president is. And so a lot of good things about it from a decentralized perspective. And one of the questions you might ask is, well, why did that happen there and not somewhere else? So the flag is a big plus, but so are the mountains, right? So one of the interesting things about Switzerland is that it just happens to be in this region of the world where there's like a lot of very good natural defense, and defending is something that the terrain to some extent gives you for free. And that is something that is not true in other places, right? So in many of the, the steppes of Eurasia where you can just roll around on horses conquering for thousands of kilometers, this land in the 1300s was not a governance utopia. So often defense-favoring worlds make it easier to do a lot of good things that we care about. Offense-favoring worlds often create bad trade-offs. And one of the ways of thinking about this is that if you have an offense-favoring world, then either nothing happens and you have stagnation, or you have one group that decides everything that's going on, and you have domination, or potentially you have multiple groups, and if the terrain makes it really hard for those multiple groups to be at peace with each other, then this creates conflict, and in the worst case, conflict potentially leads to doom. This is actually a deep fact that we, I think, even saw a little bit of in the Ethereum ecosystem. So this is Gitcoin grants round 5. This is just when the Gitcoin quadratic funding mechanism was just getting started. And in round 5, we did this interesting experiment where instead of just allowing people to make positive donations that would get matched, people could give negative donations. Like, I could donate $1 to a negative pool of a project, and that donation would cause that project to lose something like $100, and those funds would get redistributed to all the other projects in the pool. This was actually, I actually proposed to the Gitcoin team that we do this experiment. And the reason why I proposed it is because there were concerns basically about negative externalities, right? One of the things that happened in round 4 is that one of the people who earns, or actually a few of the people who earns the most from the Gitcoin quadratic funding round were people who were Twitter influencers. And the difference between being a software developer and being a Twitter influencer is that if you're just a software developer, you're creating a tool, and you're creating tools that are useful for people, right? And the story for why the good greatly outweighs the bad is pretty simple to understand. If you are a Twitter influencer, then you can think of it as education. You can also think of it as, well, social media is actually a zero-sum war. You can also think about it, well, social media is a zero-sum war, but guess what? Ethereum's on the good side of the war. And we know we're on the good side because we're Ethereum. You could also think of it as, well, actually social media is maybe negative sum, right? And the challenge is the Gitcoin quadratic funding mechanism makes it easy to express the perspective that something is a public good and you donate to it and you give it a lot of money, but it doesn't really give it any mechanism for people to express that something is a public bad and should get less money. And so if you only kind of reward the positives without penalizing the negatives, then you get some level of imbalance. Now, so we tried negative voting in round 5, and the most interesting outcome is basically that people hated it, right? There were people who got even a single negative contribution got extremely upset. There were even people who intentionally went around looking for any project that got any negative vote and provided positive votes to try to compensate for it. Just a lot of things around it did not work. And I think the big lesson here is negative externalities are just an incredibly hard problem for governance in general to deal with, right? I don't even think we've invented a mechanism yet to really deal with negative externalities in a way that is not, either monopolistic or toxic in some way. And so the better that we have a defense, the less we actually have to face this problem is basically the formula. So the goal of DAC as a broader philosophy, and this is where I finally get back into cryptography. So, yes, this is a talk that actually does reference cryptography, is basically we focus developments toward technologies that improve defense, and especially technologies that improve defense in non-centralizing ways. So we think about defense, right? We think about creating technologies that make it easier for people to be less negatively affected by stuff that is done by other people and stuff that happens in the world. We can split it up into the world of atoms and the world of bits. In the world of atoms, we can split the taxonomy in half again, and we can talk about big things and small things, right? If we talk about big things, then this is what people conventionally think about as defense. It also includes things like making more resilient architecture. It's great that we have solar panels and that we have really good batteries now. It makes it much easier for people to survive all kinds of disruptions. Maybe we should do the same with agriculture and, create a world where supply chain disruptions are much less of a big deal, and so on and so forth. Biodefense, we've got pandemics, and, the better we can deal with viruses, the healthier we're going to be. And this includes both natural pandemics and potentially artificial pandemics in the future. Now let's talk about the world of bits, right? The world of bits, I think, is something that more and more people are thinking of as a battlefield. And I split the world of bits into 2 categories. This time it's a different way of splitting it into 2 categories. So first is the situations where it's easy to agree on who the attacker is, right? We all know that if I have a password and you're trying to guess my password in order to do things out of my account, then you're the attacker and I'm the defender. And this is something that like is not really controversial in a public conversation. If one of you has 100 ETH that is in a wallet, and someone else tries to steal it, the person trying to steal it is the attacker, and we all agree on that. The other side of things is situations where it's hard to agree who is the attacker, right? So when people talk about things like misinformation, for example, well, sometimes one man's misinformation is another man's underrated argument, right? And so situations where it's hard to agree who even is the attacker is sort of a different category that I talk about separately. So this is how I think of kind of 4 of the quadrants of defense, basically physical, bio, cyber, and info. And you can guess which one of the 4 of these programmable cryptography is going to fall into. So this is something that actually has been talked about in effective altruist literature quite a bit. So differential technology development is the buzzword that they use, right? Basically, and the core idea is basically the same, right? Improve defensive technologies and don't try to improve offensive technologies. So the letter D in DAC can stand for defense. If you like, it can stand for decentralized. If you like, it can also stand for differential. We'll just make it a D. So a bit of a detour, fun bio stuff, right? So there's a lot of interesting bio research that's been happening. I mean, obviously, there's been a pandemic and there's been a lot of research into better finding ways to deal with pandemics. And there's a lot of interesting stuff that we underrate, right? So this is, for example, a nose spray. It's called betadine. And you can go and squirt it up your nose, right? You can just literally do this. And this reduces your chance of getting airborne diseases like COVID by something like 50 to 80%. And these are things that exist and that you can go buy them today. This from Aranet is also a thing you can carry in your pocket. It's a CO2 meter. And it's the CO2 that exists in the air is that exists in spaces like these is generally CO2 that's been created by a species known as humans, right? So there is a natural CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, which is 420, right? Very easy to remember meme number. You can thank all the global warming people up until now for pushing it up to 420, but hopefully they'll turn off the factories so it stays at 420 and doesn't go higher. But anything that goes above 420, it's basically a proxy for how much air you're breathing in that's been breathed out by other people. And so if you're breathing in air that's been breathed out by other people, then, well, guess what? You might be breathing in viruses, right? So there are tools like this that basically help you detect, well, are you in spaces that might be particularly dangerous or are you not, right? In this case, 728, so it's kind of, about medium. So probably, good to be careful, though, fortunately, not too bad compared to some of the other spaces I've seen. These are things that exist at an individual level. There are things that exist at a collective level. So for example, if I were to take this out and I were to notice that the number here is at 2000, I could take measures to protect myself, or I could go complain to people and try to actually get this space fixed and try to get this whole space to have better ventilation for everyone, right? And this is something that lots of people could go and do. You could talk about better vaccine manufacturing, more localized vaccine manufacturing, all kinds of things, right? And there is a huge number of things that our society is really underinvesting in on this front as well. So defensive technology is basically this very big and broad field that I think is possible to get into from all kinds of different angles. So now let's talk about cryptography as defensive technology, right? Finally, we get to the point. So who here has used encryption in the past week? If your hand is not up, your hand should be up, right? Who here has accessed a website in the past week? Who here has accessed a website in the past week without doing the thing where your browser shows you a warning and you click continue anyway and ignore the danger sign? Then that means that you've used HTTPS. The S in HTTPS stands for secure, and it can also stand for SSL, and so there's security protocols that are involved there that use encryption. When you access a website, in addition to encryption, there's also authentication, right? that has these things, then you are being protected from attackers that are in the middle that might be snooping on that information. You are protected from fake websites that are trying to impersonate that entity. You're being protected from a whole bunch of different actors. Now, if we did not have this protection, then what would we... It would be like very hard to have a digital civilization. In fact, if we did not have this kind of protection, the only way to have a digital civilization would basically be for like the police to much more aggressively try really, really hard to find where all the hackers are and go and arrest them. This would probably require the United States going into a whole bunch of other countries doing crazy illegal stuff. It might also just require like, basically not allowing internet communication to cross borders. Like, it would be a super dystopian world in all kinds of ways, right? Basically, there's two different ways to solve internet security challenges. There is armoring the sheep, and there is trying to going after the wolves. And like, going after the wolves is like, that's something you really want to do as little of as possible, right? Because when we don't agree on who's a wolf, then, well, when the wolf hunters start coming after you, and they think you're a wolf, you don't want that, right? So the more we can create a defense-favoring cyber world, the less that we can have all kinds of things that we dislike. Encryption protects your data privacy. Signatures protect against impersonation. Blockchains let us create social structures with what can be called digital hardness. So Josh Stark has this blog post called Atoms, Institutions, and Blockchains, where he basically creates a metaphor between things that are physically hard and things that are socially constructed to be hard, like institutions, things like courts, things like really basic layers of government, and blockchains, which try to do similar things, but digitally, right? And if you create social structures that have hardness, then once again, right, this is a form of defense, and it lets you create things that are resilient, and it lets you create things that people depend on that do not fall apart at the first sign of stress. And ZK snarks protect social structures against cheaters, and they do so in a way that avoids central points of data collection. So, Uniswap, I found a random site that just reviews Uniswap, and one of the nice sentences that it has is that Uniswap has never been hacked. Now, let's look at the thing on the right. So, who here remembers the fellow on the right? So, sometimes you go after the wolves and like you can actually put the wolves in prison. There are wolves that have not yet been gone after. There's wolves that are enjoying their like vacations in all kinds of places, whether Bali or whatever else. There's wolves that have just disappeared. But the thing that these have in common is that these are centralized systems, right? Their entire approach is basically, well, doing the actual crypto thing of crypto is too hard. So let's just create a system where like you deposit your coins with me and you trust me. And then sometimes they go on stage with people like Bill Clinton and they say, look, I'm sitting beside Bill Clinton and I'm legitimate, and so you can trust me even more. And then it turns out that for some reason this doesn't work, right? So the things like FTX are, you can say they're part of crypto, but you can definitely not say that they are defensive technology, and you can definitely not say that they are programmable cryptography, right? So you have centralized systems and you have decentralized systems that actually try to have security models that are independent of particular individuals. So crypto is not automatically defensive. Gnosis Safe is defensive. Gnosis Safe creates a world where more of us can live in peace and not have to worry about having all of our money lost. FTX does not do this. So build more things like the former and build fewer things like the latter. So let's get to programmable cryptography. Programmable cryptography makes very high levels of security cheap. And it makes them cheap in two ways. It makes them cheap in terms of verification cost, and it also makes them cheap in terms of developer time. What do we mean by this? Without programmable cryptography, if you want to create a new application and you want your new application to be secured, you have to basically create a new cryptographic protocol, right? And if you create a new cryptographic protocol, well, guess what? You're probably going to fail, right? You've probably heard the phrase, don't roll your own crypto. But if we have general purpose programmable cryptography, things like ZK snarks, then you can make a new application But to make a new application, all you have to do is open up Circom and you write new circuit code. So it basically takes a problem which is like a crazy math PhD super or whatever problem into just like, let's write a program. And then probably in 2 years when, GPT is going to update a bit, it'll probably be able to like start writing like circuits for you, which you definitely should not trust on the first time. But what you probably should do is, probably write the code and then let AI tools check it and basically try to attack it from as many different angles as possible and like try to really make sure that the thing is secure. And doing all of this to the same standard of security is something that will take less and less effort, right? So what I want to see, and what a lot of people have wanted to see, is a world where security happens by default, right? A world where things that you do on the internet are protected against attacks. And this is just a part of the sort of physics of the internet, right? So as an analogy, like who here has played those like video game, like let's say MMORPGs, things like World of Warcraft. So you know how inside of those MMORPGs, sometimes like if you interact with another player who's supposed to be friendly, like you just have no way to attack them, right? You just see like yourself and you see them, and like there isn't even a way for you to go swing your sword at them, right? Who here remembers this? So that kind of world is a world that is much safer. That kind of world is a world where we do not even, need courts to the same extent, right? It's a world where the governance load can be a lot smaller, and it's a world where just like many kinds of problems become much easier to solve, right? Now, unfortunately, our physical physics does not work in this way. But can we make our digital physics work in this way? And cryptography is, and especially everything that we do being cryptographied by default, does get us a significant fraction of the way toward that actually being true, right? So ZK snarks and everything being ZK snarks and everything being PCD'd by default, if this is something that we can have, if this is something that we can make the world efficient enough to have, can get us part of the way there, right? But, we want to try to get as much of the way there as possible. And, if you think that like, well, we'll never get 100% of the way there, what's the point? Just remember, well, if we were twice as further from that than we are today, things would be much, much worse, right? So things can be better, things can be worse. And I think this is a direction that's really worth pushing in. And it's a direction where it's really worth working together as a community to build the general purpose tools that make it easier for people to just cryptography everything by default. The last 30 years have seen us accepting 1000x plus overhead in exchange for easier software development. Who here writes programs in Python? If you write programs in Python instead of assembly code, you are doing this already. You are already accepting 1000x overhead in exchange for easier software development. In the next 30 years, we may see people accept 1000x overhead in exchange for better security guarantees. Now, fortunately, a really good piece of news is that these 2000x's, they in practice do not actually multiply with each other. We're not actually going to accept 1,000,000x overhead. And the reason is that generally, the parts of an application that have the most overhead are not the parts of the application that are the most security demanding, right? The stuff that is the highest overhead, you have your graphics, you have, downloading the big files, you have running LLMs, you have all kinds of things. The stuff that like really demands security, at least in the applications that we've built so far, is like pretty simple bit twiddling, right? And so, even if wrapping everything in programmable cryptography by default gives us 1000x overhead, or even maybe 100,000x overhead, perhaps it's still something that's worth doing. We just need to build the tools to make it also easy in terms of development time. Info defense. So this is another really important frontier, right? So remember what I've said before. Cryptography is about when you can agree who is the attacker. Info defense is about who can't. So community notes, who here has seen community notes on Twitter? This is a thing that's been added on Twitter recently, and it basically is this really nice tool that allows community people on Twitter in general to vote on basically adding these notes that provide quote context, and sometimes context is a euphemism for smacking them down with what the hell, man, you're totally wrong here. like basically helping people better understand like what actually is the truth behind a particular situation. And community notes is one of those things that's like, because of some interesting details in its algorithm and how its algorithm inherently tries to sort of fight and cancel out political polarization, it's like actually pretty powerful, and it's been like pretty successful. So I actually wrote a pretty big blog post recently talking about this. Would encourage you to learn more. Another type of info defense that is closer to home for us in the Ethereum community is protecting users against scammers and hacks, right? There is only so far that you can go with security using tools like formal verification. Why? Because formal verification says a program matches a particular precise mathematical description of an intent. The problem is, well, we humans often do not even know what the mathematical description of our intent is, right? You can only go so far in solving problems that are inside the model when the biggest problems we face are all outside the model. So MetaMask here has a really nice tool that basically this is built in. It maintains a list of known scam sites. And if you try to access a known scam site, it just tells you deceptive site ahead, and you click a button that you can only click a button that says back to safety, right? And this is a space where I think we could see a lot more innovation. It would be amazing to see a lot more innovation, right? There's lots of scams going on. There's lots of people attempting to make scam links. Lots of people trying to make web pages that trick you into signing weird ERC-1271 messages, or giving up your coins, or like permitting some application to just like take away all of your ERC-20s. And for regular users, like parsing what of this is trying to attack you is like very difficult and potentially impossible, right? And so creating user-side tools that try to automatically detect those situations, possibly using community-curated lists, possibly using AI, possibly something else, and better informing and kind of stopping these attacks from reaching users on the client side is like in a form of info defense that would be really valuable for the space to work on even more, right? And I think this applies both for blockchain stuff and it applies for programmable cryptography, because the whole point of programmable cryptography to a large extent is to protect people's privacy, but you are not going to protect people's privacy if people just click yes on the first thing that says approve that like this weird squiggly program running over your code, and it turns out that the weird squiggly program just like takes your entire secret hard drive and just gives it to the attacker, right? So improving info defense also super important. So calls to action: build defensive technology. Programmable cryptography and some blockchain applications are DEAC. So are lots of other things. Lots of other things are also not DEAC, right? So demand, support, and fund defensive technology. Defensive technology in general is always an amazing thing to work on for a hackathon. And the more tools like this we can have, whether part of wallets or even part of browsers or part of standalone anything, the better. And look for business models that favor protecting the user, right? A lot of the time, defense doesn't happen because there are no business models that favor defense. Well, if in those, sometimes there might be, right? Like, actually experiment with like charging monthly subscriptions for these things. People might actually be willing to pay for them. The more that we can figure out like what are business development models that actually support creating this stuff, and then the more of these kinds of things can happen, both in the in our crypto space and in the broader cyberspace, and even in the physical space. And so this is something that I hope we can really produce more of over the coming decades. So thank you.